If you've ever felt the weight of family secrets, or if you've ever wondered how trauma is passed down like an heirloom and can be more of a curse than a gift, or if you believe that art can tell stories that words alone cannot, if so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing Feeding Ghosts by Tessa Hulls. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and on this channel, I review every kind of book I can get my hands on: fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and everything in between. Today's book is Feeding Ghosts by Tessa Hulls. It is a powerful and visually stunning graphic memoir. I picked it up as part of my project to read through the Pulitzer Prize finalists and winners. This review is also the final stop on my Pulitzer Prize playlist. Since the announcement of the Pulitzer Prizes, I've been working my way through the winners and the finalists in all of the book categories, and today's book, Feeding Ghosts, is the last book and winner in the memoir/autobiography category, and my last book of all of them. And of course, if you would like to know more, please go check out my playlist for the Pulitzer Prizes for this year, 2025, and you can also see my reaction video. And in the coming weeks, I should have a ranking of all of the books. I particularly enjoy looking back at all of these books that I've read and considering which ones did I enjoy the most. I think that this book in particular is very fitting to end with all of my Pulitzer Prize reading, because it really shows the range that the Pulitzer Prize finalists and winners can be. This one is not exactly straightforward. Like I said, it is a graphic memoir, and I actually think that the topic of it is also pretty distinct, and all of that shows you just how strange and beautiful and compelling all these different Pulitzer Prize works can be. Before we dive into the book, let's take a quick look at the author, although this is slightly redundant considering that this is an autobiography, so much of what the book is about is the author's life. And I don't believe that the author is much of an author outside of this book. She does have some other projects, especially art related, that she has worked on, but I do not think that she has much else to talk about her writing. But just to give you a little background about her, Tessa Hulls is a writer, artist, and cartoonist whose work often explores intersections of history, memory, and identity. She's published some essays, but she is most famous for having created some comics and exhibited some visual art, all while pursuing projects that bridge the personal with the historical. Her background is especially important for Feeding the Ghosts, the book that we're taking a look at today, because this isn't just a memoir, it's a reckoning with 3 generations of her own family. And she also brings together her skills as both a storyteller and a visual artist to capture experiences that are often quite fragmented and can be very painful and really can be quite difficult to put into words. So the result is a book that feels as much like an act of historical recovery as it does about a personal memoir. With that, let me give a little introduction into the book itself. As I've now made several references to, it is a graphic memoir, and then I will give you a detailed summary of what goes on in the book. Feeding Ghosts is a graphic memoir, and that format is a big part of what makes it stand out. It's also one of the reasons that this was the last Pulitzer book that I could read, because every waitlist for it was incredibly long, and it also took me a while to read, and so I think I had to renew it several times, and I finally had to actually go get a hard copy of it from the library, and every time it took weeks and weeks, if not months, to get a hold of it, and so it has taken me I don't know, it's been like 5-6 months now to read this book, simply because it was the hardest one to get a hold of. Clearly, I was not the only one that wanted to get my hands on it, hence why it has been so hard to finally finish it. I would say that at the heart of this book, it tells the story of 3 generations of women. So you have Tessa, who is telling the story. You have her grandmother, who lived through political persecution in China, her mother, who carried the weight of all of the difficulties that her mother experienced and the ways that she would transfer trauma onto her daughter. And then, of course, we have the artist herself. And all of that is going to give us this fascinating and very complicated and engaging look at this multi-generational quest for understanding trauma and the consequences of that trauma on this family, as well as questions of identity and acceptance, as Tessa herself comes from a multiracial family. Her father, I think, is English, and her mother actually does not know her own father. And so there's just a lot of things that make this a fascinating read. And with that, let's dive into the book itself. But first, I must say that I do need to give a spoiler warning. I will be walking through the storyline and the themes of Feeding Ghosts, including some details about the family and the life and the things they experienced, although Like I said, it's a pretty long book, and I do think there is too much of this book that you just have to dig into it to really appreciate. So I may not give quite as many details as I usually would. But that being said, I do want to make sure you guys are warned, just in case I do share something about the storylines that you didn't want to know and you wanted to come into this book fresh. And if that is the case, please go read the book and then come see what I have to say. Let's move on to the actual summary. The book opens with Tessa Hulls, as she is the third in this link and this chain of women. Right away, she makes clear that this isn't just her story, it's also the story of her mother and grandmother, and the way trauma threads its way through generations. We first meet her grandmother, who was a journalist in China during a very turbulent and dangerous era for journalists during the Cultural Revolution. She was educated, outspoken, and quite talented. And she actually had a lot of interactions with a variety of people in both the international community, which is actually going to lead to her giving birth and being a single mother to Tessa's mother. And she is also going to have a fair amount of interaction with the communist government as well. So her grandmother finally escapes mainland China with her daughter, Tessa's mother, and they go to Hong Kong. And it is in Hong Kong that Tessa's grandmother publishes this pretty popular memoir, at least that is what she claimed. It's kind of hard to verify all of it. She does find out that the memoir does exist. It was a thing, but the legacy of it does not seem to have had all that much of an impact. And that's one of the things that she is struggling with throughout this whole book. And it is also there that much of the few connections that they had to mainland China, many of the things that it supported Tessa's mother and grandmother, really start to dissolve. Tessa's mother is accepted into a very prestigious school that also helps to raise, in some cases, orphans, or at the very least people that don't have a clear-cut place in society. And that is what's going to happen when Tessa's grandmother is going to, her mental capacity is really going to decline, and she is going to become essentially incoherent and incapable of understanding the world around her and really negotiating in any real sense. And she is going to end up institutionalized. And this, of course, leads Tessa's mother to grow up in this orphanage. And in the process, she is going to get an excellent education. And again, she's also really going to start to feel the burden of trying to help her mother and trying to preserve a relationship with her mother, even though her mother really struggles with understanding what's going on around her. And it also gives her this really conflicted sense of identity. And she is going to come to the United States, and it is here in the United States that she is going to eventually marry Tessa's father, who I said before is British. They are going to have Tessa. And then that is really the premise of the book, is that Tessa, here she is growing up in a multiracial family who has a grandmother and mother that are not only living with her, but are really complicating things. Tessa is trying to figure out her own identity, her own connection. She really doesn't fully feel all that Chinese, but she also doesn't feel all that American. And so this is an ongoing issue with her. And on top of that, she is having frequent conflicts with her mother. And she's trying to understand why that is the case. And she herself also has very strong reactions to her mother when they are coming into conflict over a wide variety of things. And so when that happens, Tessa is really starting to sense that there's a much deeper problem. Of course, she has seen that her grandmother has lost her abilities to really engage with the world. And so all of this is also leading Tessa to be very concerned with her own future. And you are going to see Tessa start to make a lot of decisions about how to figure out her past. Well, actually, before she does that, of course, she's going to go off and be rebellious. She's going to go off to college. She's going to study who knows what. And along the way, she's going to get a little more distance from her mother. And she doesn't necessarily want that, but whenever she goes home, she feels like they are constantly fighting each other. And on top of all of that, she just doesn't really know what she wants from life. And she's going to have a bit of exploration. And she does have this, essentially this draw to, one, be artistic. That's something that she does before this book. And that's, of course, why she even writes this book in the format that she does as a graphic memoirs, because that's what she is particularly skilled in. And she's going to travel the world. She becomes pretty obsessed with doing it on bike, even in places that don't necessarily make a lot of sense, but that is the way that she likes to go around the world. But she's also at the same time feeling this pull, this draw, this desire to better understand her mom, better understand where her mother came from, better understand her grandmother, and try to better understand all the various steps that brought her to be the person that she is and in the situation that she is in. And that is what leads her into writing this memoir. She's going to get a few grants and actually go live in China and try to learn Chinese. And eventually she is, of course, going to write this memoir that helps to detail all of that. I think that's a pretty good summary of what is going on in this book. There is a lot of other things that I could talk about, all these side stories, all these, very various things that she discusses. She certainly makes a point of discussing not just the relationship with her mother, but trying to give as much detail as possible and as much understanding as possible as to why exactly the relationship with her mother is so strained. And I would say that that is in many ways at the heart of this book. She does spend a lot of time talking about her grandmother and talking about her grandmother's past. Unfortunately, she cannot really understand what her grandmother is thinking. Not only does her grandmother pass away in the writing of this book, but she can't understand her grandmother. Her grandmother can't understand her. And this inability to understand each other is also one of the things that really scares her and one of the things that leads her to write about this and try to figure out as much as she could. And I will say that she draws some really interesting conclusions, but above all, I will say that she does clearly, in the writing of this book, help herself to better understand the world that she lives in, to better understand the world that her mother lives in and the world that her mother came from, and what type of world she would like to be involved in, and the type of relationship that she would like to have with her mother going forward, which I will say that the book does not end with some real happy ending. She does certainly have a better relationship with her mother by the end, but it is also very evident at the end that she's still trying to figure out exactly what type of relationship she wants with her mother and how to achieve it. And you can see that her mother is also trying to make that possible, even though she may have her own issues with understanding the world the way that Tessa does. And that is the heart of this book. So let me talk a little bit about my personal reaction to this book as I read it, my thoughts on it. Let me start by saying some of the things that I enjoyed about this book, and then some of the things that I had some reservations about, or things that I just maybe didn't enjoy quite as much. Above all is the artwork. And it's not just that the pictures are lovely, they're everything. They are at times beautiful and incredibly expressive, but they can also be filled with dissonance. There's going to be symbolism at times that isn't, fully understandable. And there's also just a lot of emotion, which it's worth noting that if you're dealing with a negative emotion, then perhaps that picture is going to reflect it. And I think that she does an excellent job at that. And she doesn't just simply draw events, she really captures the confusion of memory, the confusion of the world that she grew up in, and she really tries with all of the artwork to capture the weight of legacy and the emotional undertones that words alone really just couldn't convey. And I would say that some of the panels are breathtaking. I would also say that others, in just as good a way, are unsettling. And I would say that together they make the book far more powerful than it would have been as prose alone, I think. And I appreciate the gamble that she took, and I appreciate that she took her form of art, the one that she is familiar with and capable of doing, and that she put it into this format. That being said, I have to say that I came into Feeding Ghosts feeling very excited. Part of it was because of the format, which I think that she lived up to in that regard. I enjoy graphic memoirs. I was, hoping it would feel a lot like Persepolis, and in some ways that it did, but then in some ways it didn't. And Persepolis is one of my favorite books, so it's not totally fair to compare them, but I do think that there were a few elements about this that just made it a little harder for me to appreciate. For starters, it's just too long. I'm sorry. Like I said, it was really hard for me to finish because I would check it out, I would try to read it, and I just wouldn't even be going fast enough because it's just so long that it would become due. And then I guess everyone that checked it out had that same problem, and that's why the waitlist would be so long. And so I think that really took a toll on my ability to appreciate it. I really, I struggled so much with just how hard it was to read this book simply because of the length of it. And I also think that kind of really affected some of the more dramatic elements of it as well. I think that it was a little too frenetic, and at times I think she was going for some kind of dramatic withholding or some kind of dramatic suspense, and instead it just kind of protracted the story in a way that I didn't love. And I think that her effort at trying to tie these three generations together, it really requires you trying to dig deep into three very different individuals and three very different experiences. And I know that's what she wanted to do, but I also think that simply the way that she presented it just made it a little too disjointed at times. And so I didn't love that. Also, again, this isn't fair to it. I loved Persepolis. In some ways, it's kind of the opposite of Persepolis, because Persepolis, you have the main character telling you her experiences as a teenager and essentially her innocence or ignorance of just how complicated the world around her is and just what type of situation her family is in. And so she's detailing you all these little vignettes, all these stories. This is the other way around. This is someone much older that, in an effort to try to make sense of her life, is going back and finding all of those major events, such as the Chinese Cultural Revolution and, of course, her grandmother's decline and her mother's decision to come to the United States, and all of these various things that really affected the way that this story could even be told. I know it's not fair to compare it to Persepolis, again, one of my absolute favorite books, but I do have to say that it certainly affected my expectations, and it was one of those things that let me down just a little bit. But all that being said, I still have to say that I thought that its purpose and its decision to be a graphic memoir were perfect, and I absolutely think she did an excellent job in that regard. It's just that I probably would have slimmed it down a little and then probably taken on some of the elements that were a little bit disjointed and maybe recommended taking slightly different routes. All that being said, I still would generally recommend this book, especially to someone that enjoys graphic novels or graphic memoirs. I think there's a lot to be appreciated here, and I certainly understand why it won, and I appreciate that it was novel in its approach. And I have to say all that after, I've complained about some of the other elements. But all in all, I'd say that it was a well-made book, and it certainly had an emotional payoff. With that in mind, who is this for? I would say that Feeding Ghosts is a book for readers who want more than a straightforward memoir. So if you've ever picked up a graphic memoir, like I've already mentioned, Persepolis or Mouse or Fun Home, and you've been struck by how the combination of art and text can open up layers of meaning, you'll find a lot to appreciate here. The author pushes the format to its limits, using pictures not just to illustrate, but to interpret and to convey emotions and absences and confusion that words alone really cannot do justice. It's also for readers who are drawn to multi-generational stories, especially those shaped by migration, exile, and trauma. Her grandmother's survival in communist China, her mother's struggles in both the orphanage as well as in the United States, and her own search for meaning all add up to a narrative that stretches across continents and decades and a lot of major world events. And if you've ever been fascinated by how history shapes private lives, then this book will also speak to you. I would also say that readers of literary memoirs will also find this rewarding. It's not just an autobiography, it's historical, artistic, and psychological all at once. If you're following the Pulitzer Prize lists or looking for books that push the boundaries of memoir, Feeding Ghosts is a standout example. And finally, this is for readers who value art as much as narrative. If you like books where the artwork itself is part of the storytelling, where illustration doesn't just support the text, but it challenges it, it shapes it, it complicates it, and it deepens it, then this will absolutely be worth your time. That being said, who is this not for? Feeding Ghosts is powerful, but it is not a book for everyone. First, if you're looking for a short or fast-paced memoir, this probably isn't it. The book is long and at times deliberately fragmented. The author often circles around her subject matter, holding back and returning to events later, which can feel protracted. If you prefer memoirs that are tightly structured or linear, this style may frustrate you. It's also not for readers who want their family stories wrapped up neatly or who expect resolution. The book deals heavily with mental illness, exile, and conflict, and the author makes no attempt to soften those edges. On the contrary, she is trying to highlight them. And so the relationship between Tessa and her mother is especially fraught, and the book provides plenty of examples of their arguments and clashes. And so if you're hoping for an uplifting reconciliation, this story is not quite that. Although, again, I do think by the end of it, they certainly have a better relationship. The subject matter itself may also be too heavy for some. The book deals with intergenerational trauma, as well as madness, emotional volatility, and strained family bonds. For readers who find those themes triggering or overwhelming, you may not find this to be a particularly comfortable experience. And finally, it's not for those that don't enjoy the graphic memoir format. Art is essential here. It's not just a supplement to the words, but it is a core part of the storytelling. So if you're the kind of reader who skips over illustrations or feels that comics aren't serious, then this book really will not work for you. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for calling it a comic. I know there's a distinction, but if that is not how you like to engage with storytelling, this is not going to be for you. In the end, Feeding Ghosts is a memoir that is as much about survival as it is about storytelling. The author, Tessa Hulls, doesn't just recount her family's past, she wrestles with it, layer by layer, image by image, word by word. The book is long, sometimes difficult, and often emotionally heavy, but it is also beautiful, raw, and unforgettable. For me, it wasn't quite the experience I was hoping for when I picked it up, but still, I certainly admire the ambition of what the author has created and the way she uses the graphic form to capture not just history, but emotion and confusion and legacy. It's not a perfect book, but it is a book that matters. Of course, I would love to know what you guys are thinking about this book, or if you have opinions about other graphic memoirs, please let me know some of your suggestions, or if you have other thoughts about the Pulitzer Prizes, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Of course, go check out my playlist for the Pulitzer Prizes, or if that's not your thing, please go check out one of my other videos. I have videos on so many different books. Again, the name of the channel is Spencer Reads Everything, and so I'd like to think that I have at least one other video that you would find interesting, and if you do, please share the video. The more that people know about my channel, the more videos I can make. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.